All right, we'd like to welcome everyone this morning. My name is Megan Seidman. I'm the Partnerships Manager at the Silver Unicorn Bookstore here in Acton, Massachusetts. We want to thank you for joining this morning and supporting independent bookstores. And through your participation and attendance, we can bring you awesome events like this in partnership with Direct Federal Credit Union. And I'm going to turn it over to Daniel Navarez right now, who's going to say a few words to welcome us today.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Like Megan said, my name is Daniel. I'm here in representation of Direct Federal. We are a credit union who serves Middlesex and Norfolk counties. So anyone that lives, works, studies, worships in any of those two counties would be able to be a member of the credit union. And as part of our engagement with the community and services to the community, and obviously in light of everything, the groundswell that has been happening over the past few years with all sorts of topics pertaining to social justice, we felt the need to engage and to provide additional support for these causes, and at the same time, support people that are also doing the work. So again, we've partnered with Silver Unicorn as a way of tapping into local authors or local bookstores as a way of engaging with the community, creating community, and supporting the communities. And we've created what we are calling our Diversity and Inclusion Author Series, which again focuses on authors who are engaged or who are writing texts, children's books in particular up to now, that tackle these subjects or at least inform us and provide us context and history surrounding the subject of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So with that in mind, again, we have partnered with Silver Unicorn. We are looking to partner with additional bookstores. So we want to keep, reaching out and making this grow. And in each instance, we've committed to provide, free books for anyone that pre-registers. We're eventually also providing free books to boys and girls clubs in different communities. And even we're in talks to probably also extend this to some of the schools in different school districts. So it's a growing effort. It's not perfect. It's still in baby steps, but we're very proud of it, and we're looking forward to all the relationships and all that we can do with a project like this. So with that in mind, as Megan said, this is our second event, and we're very proud to have Ray Anthony Shepard join us in this occasion. I unfortunately, the winter would have made it impossible anyway to have a physical presentation with all COVID and everything, and getting people out there. So it's great to have the flexibility of having virtual presentations for people that are all over. So again, with that in mind, I guess I want to hand it off to Ray to see if you want to contextualize the book and give us some background. And I do have my Direct Federal background, so I can't see it, but I do have my copy with me. So Ray, thank you again for joining us, for accepting our invitation, and I'm very much looking forward to your reading of this text.
Ray, why don't I say a few words about how you came to be here and discuss this book, Runaway, The Daring Escape of Ona Judge, which is written by Ray Anthony Shepard and illustrated by Keith Mallett. So Ray is in his encore career, as he calls it. Before Ray came to write picture books, he was a teacher, a retired educator-in-chief, a graduate from the University of Nebraska College of Education and the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where he received the Martin Luther King Jr. Fellowship from the Woodrow Wilson Foundation. Runaway is the Jane Addams Honor Book of the Month. And we are really excited that this coincided with Black History Month, celebrating authors who are portraying stories that you don't traditionally hear, which is Ray's going to tell you a little bit more about that when he gives us context for the book. The book also has received a notable recognition from the National Organization of Children's Librarians. And Ray is the proud grandfather of 3 grandchildren, and not his youngest because he's a new grandpa as of 6 weeks ago, but his second oldest, Elizabeth, this book is dedicated to her. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ray. And when Ray is done speaking, you'll see that my screen is going to show the book so that you all can follow along as Ray is reading. So thanks, Ray, for sharing your time with us today and for writing such an amazing story. We're excited to hear more.
Well, thank you very much, Megan, and thank you, Daniel. A special thanks to Digital Federal and to Silver Unicorn. And I urge everyone who's in the greater Acton area to stop in and visit Silver Unicorn. It's a great bookstore. It's where I do my shopping, and I encourage others to do it as well. The story of Ona Judge, which I call Runaway, the Daring Escape, takes place on one day in her life. She lived 74 years, and she was enslaved for 26 of those years, enslaved by the most powerful family in America at that time, Martha and George Washington. And the way in which I approach the story is to tell it from a point of view that if you were enslaved and working in the fields 8, 12 hours a day in the hot sun, and you turned and you stopped and you looked over at the large house, the Mount Vernon mansion, and you saw someone who had the best job a slave could have. She was the personal servant, if you like, to the most powerful woman in America, and also the richest woman in Virginia. And then one day you heard she didn't have to work hard in the fields. And then one day you heard that she ran away. And so here's that story from that perspective. Megan? Use the arrow on the right. And keep going. Keep going to the arrow on the right. There you are. So Runaway, the Daring Escape of Ona Judge. And Keith Mallett is the illustrator, who's done just a wonderful job of visually telling the story. And as Megan mentioned, this book is dedicated to my daughter, Elizabeth, who is in 2nd grade in Brooklyn, New York. She calls me Pop Pop. Okay, here's the story. Remember, you're in the field, you're leaning against your hoe, or you're stopping your work, and you say, Ona Judge, Ona Judge, why you run away, Ona Judge? You had fine dresses, fancy bonnets for your bushy black hair, soft shoes on your tender brown feet. Why'd you run, Ona Judge? You rode in a first-class carriage with the lady who called you her own. On Cherry Street, she took you to the best houses when she visited other important ladies. Why'd you run, Ona Judge? You were the lady's favorite. She carried you off for Mount Vernon when you were 16. Didn't ask if you wanted to go. Didn't ask if you would miss your mama. She hauled you to New York to brush her hair. She took you to Philadelphia to sew her elegant gowns. Why'd you run on a judge? You ate the food Hercules cooked for the lady's husband, George Washington. You had your own room in the president's house with a fireplace and servants to bring you wood. Why'd you run on a judge? You were the color of saltwater caramel with freckles of cinnamon flakes, your hair the scent of dogwood, your eyes dark like British coal. On Chestnut Street, men tipped their hats to you and Eliza, the president's granddaughter. They thought you were her friend. Why'd you run on a judge? You saw history at the dining room table when you peeked through the kitchen door. Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Alexander Hamilton, warriors and diplomats who made America free. Did you think they meant you? You didn't work in the buckwheat fields. Your hands stayed soft, your clothes kept clean. Why'd you run on a judge? The lady read you stories from the Bible, told you her problems, didn't teach you how to read or show you how to write, wanted you the way you were, her pet, her darling slave. Why'd you run on a judge? Didn't you know you belonged to the lady, like her favorite chair or a pair of silk stockings? She was getting old, wanted to keep you in the family, gave you to her granddaughter, Eliza. Eliza, the girl you played with when you were 10 and she was 7. Now a mean and sassy woman would keep you in fine dresses, fancy bonnets and soft shoes, let you rock her babies to sleep. Why'd you run on a judge? But you walked out the door, ran into the Philadelphia night, left the lady and the president at the dining table. Didn't you know the lady would cry? Didn't you know the president would think you ungrateful? You were his money walking out the door. Why'd you run on a judge? Didn't you know being a slave in the president's house was grand? Didn't you know you broke the law? Didn't you know George Washington would send men after you? But you knew you were more than a $10 pet the lady wanted back. In an attic, basement, or room no one could see, you waited for the boat to carry you on the underground sea, where your future would not be enslaved. For the rest of your days, they called you a runaway, a fugitive, but liberty rang for you. You dreamed a dream you would make true, to read, to write, to do what you want, to go where you liked, to be sure your children would not be slaves like you, like your mother, your grandmother, and her grandmother too. Is that why you ran? Then run, on a judge, run. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. It's always amazing to hear the words of the author read the book aloud. So now we're going to turn to our audience and see if there's any questions that you have for Ray about Own a Judge, about the book, or even about his process as a writer. And I'll ask the first one myself, because this is what I was left with. What happened to Ona after she ran?
Good question. She was carried on a boat to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, not far from Boston, about less than 2 hours, and she lived for 54 years in New Hampshire area near Portsmouth. George Washington made 2 attempts to rescue to recapture her, and in both attempts she was able to escape, and she lived in New Hampshire until she died at age 74. She married a free Black man who was also a merchant marine or merchant sailor, and they had 3 children. And she did eventually learn to read and was active in a church in the Portsmouth area.
Well, this is why we read books, because I was born and raised in New Hampshire and I've never heard of Ona's story. So now at the age of 47, living in Massachusetts, I learn about this important woman from New Hampshire's history. So thank you for bringing her story to all of us. Daniel, any questions from you? Or I'm monitoring the chat. I can keep going, but want to give pause and see if there's anything that you'd want to ask Ray before we continue.
Sure, I guess I have a few. I'll ask the first one, which is particularly that the relationship with. I'm intrigued with the creative process and that relationship with Keith, the illustrator, and how, you know, how was that relationship and the back and forth between you providing the language, the words, and then seeing the images and selecting or anything. So just a general sense of that.
Well, first of all, Keith and I have never met physically. We've corresponded or exchanged a lot of emails. I'm blessed to have a very exceptional editor and designer, and they selected Keith. His illustrations were certainly on target in telling the kind of story that I wanted to tell. We sort of, for whatever reason, osmosis, if you like, he's in San Diego, I'm in Boston. We're communicating by email, but he captured the type of story that I wanted to tell, presenting a different type of story about slavery, not about the physical drudgery of slavery, but the emotional. So you have the best job, but you want to you still want freedom. And some reviewers have referred to his illustrations as American Girl-like, and they're exactly right. So what I wanted to give young readers is an image that they could identify with, and a protagonist that they could identify with, both visually, emotionally, through the words. So that was the process. And his illustrations have also won awards for this book. Thank you for your question.
Talk a little bit more about the timeline in the back of the book, because I'm not sure if everyone gave that its proper due. It's really fascinating, Ona's life after that, and I encourage folks to give that some time and attention. Did that take significant research, or how did you begin to piece that together, and how did you take what actually happened and pull that into the story?
Right. Well, here's the approach I use in writing picture books, or writing books in general, but particular picture books. The script, the story itself, is a performance script for an adult, primarily an adult, to read to a young reader, to present to a young reader. It gives the teacher, the librarian, the parent, the grandparent, a chance to perform, if you like. The back of the book, the author note, is information primarily for adults to help them fully understand the story. So I have the timeline that shows that when Martha, the wealthiest woman in Virginia, she loses her first husband. She marries George Washington. They move to Mount Vernon. She brings a bunch of slaves with her, enslaved people with her, including Ona's mother, Betty. And then it takes it all the way through. It gives the adult in the room a brief history, but enough history for them to feel confident in telling the story. And I do the same on the left-hand page with the author note. Now, please note, for those of you who, Megan, perhaps you can show it. Just hold up the book, the last page. You'll see an advertisement on, there are no page numbers, but right next to the timeline. The timeline, the gray bar there, that's actually a reprint from a 1796 newspaper in Philadelphia in which George Washington placed for the capture of Ona Judge. It's asking people to help him find her, and he offers $10 for her return. And so in the story, I have a line about you knew you were more than a $10 pet, and that comes right from that advertisement. Incidentally, $10 was the price of a barrel of flour. Just to put it in, and so everything. Here's the other thing I would want you, that should be known. This is factual, and many of the lines are direct quotes. When I say bushy black hair, tender frame, slender frame, those are from this advertising piece. Or when I say, and didn't you know George Washington would be ungrateful? When he writes an agent in New Hampshire, he says he will not reward her for being ungrateful. So it's historically accurate, but I try to tell it in a way that for young readers not to put them to sleep.
Where did you find the story? How did you find out about Ona?
My daughter was going to graduate school in Philadelphia at the University of Pennsylvania. Being both history buffs, she was a history major. We went to the president's house, the site of the president's house where she lived, and there was the story. And so it's through osmosis, if you like. It's a story that struck me, spoke to me. And then shortly after that, an adult book came out called Never Caught by Erica Dunbar, which became a bestseller, and I think is about to be made into a film. Again, a well-researched, well-written book for adults. And so between my research, but primarily through secondary research, primary research, both the George Washington papers as well as some other scholars.
Yeah, because traditionally you don't hear a lot about George Washington owning slaves. You hear about Thomas Jefferson. So it is bringing to light sort of a contradiction.
Yes. It is not, in these day and age, people will say, well, we shouldn't say anything negative about our presidents. Slavery was very much a part of American life. You can't have a plantation without having enslaved workers. The cost would be horrendous, not plausible. And so I've had someone say to me, I didn't know George Washington had slaves. The truth is that the first 8, with the exception of John Adams, the first 8 or 9 presidents were slaveholders, including many Supreme Court justices.
Wow. Ray, when you think about your encore career as you've described it. And just for the participants out there, as I said in the opening, Ray is an accomplished educator, and then in his encore career began writing. Can you tell our participants a little bit about what it's like to research a book, write a book, publish a book, and give them a sense of it's a long time in from the moment you start writing to when it gets published to when you arrive here at an event like today. So
Yeah.
to give people a sense of how that works.
It's forever. And when you're my age, you worry about the next book that you write. You won't be here when it comes out. It takes so long. This Runaway I wrote, maybe it took me less than a year to research and write, because it's a fairly short book, but it took 3 to 4 years by time it was placed with a publisher. The publisher found the right illustrator, and when it was published January of 2021. So it takes a while. And to give you another example, my next book, which I finished in just a few months ago in November, I have worked on for 4 years. The illustrator has just been assigned, and so it takes a while. It takes a while, and it should take a while, because you want to be accurate. You want to tell the best story you can. You want the best illustrator possible. And since I write for my grandchildren and their generation, I want to produce books that will last a while.
Great. I do have a quick question. Coming back to the book itself as its own thing, I was drawn by 2 separate things. So I guess it's a double question. I'll start with the word. So images and words, right? So I'll start with words.
Mm-hmm.
I was drawn to, and you already said a lot of it is factual and taken from that notice and other sources, but the way that you use language that we usually associate with beauty,
Mm-hmm.
like ornate bonnets and elegant gowns,
Right.
and all these beautiful objects, artifacts that are what people usually desire, right? We want to have those things. And
Right.
then Ona was surrounded by those things and occasionally got to participate in them.
Right.
But obviously that contrasts with what she's actually going through, right? Slavery. Like there's one point, didn't you know being a slave in the president's house was grand? And so that contrast between the word grand and slave in the same sentence, but then seeing that playing out throughout the entire book. Could you talk more about selecting that beautiful language as opposed to selecting language that perhaps spoke about, the horrors of slavery? So that contrast and the way that it works in our minds.
Well, thank you. Because I wanted to tell this story about emotional and psychological enslavement,
Mm-hmm.
and to stress the point that humans are resilient, but most of all, they desire liberty and freedom and independence, self-independence, to be a self-advocate. And so here amidst this wealth, seemingly wealth that she had at her fingertips, she's rejecting it. So I use the language to show this tension going on within her, and ultimately her decision. And the thing too, she lives her life in New Hampshire, although she's fugitive, she could never be free because of the way the laws are written. But she's a fugitive, independent, but very poor. She suffered. She gave up a lot for the life she chose.
And then the other aspect of it, the images, right? In tandem with that contrast of the ornate, beautiful language with the realities of slavery, the images then tell the story of Ona at no point smiling or being happy or anything, except for that final image, which ends up being the cover. And it's not a full-fledged smile. It's almost like a smirk. It's almost like I'm finally seeing the light, but I'm not there yet. So I guess I want to hear commentary on that aspect, the images, the negation of happiness to Ona, which is, it makes total sense, obviously. But then, providing the reader at the end with that little glimmer of hope, I guess.
You're very insightful. That's indeed how the illustrator has captured the conflict. That's the way the illustrator supports telling the story. You see it in her facial expression. Thank you for that question. That's the first time I've had that question. That's good.
And I'm glad you selected it as the cover, but it was telling, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, Megan, you were gonna
Ray,
say
can you tell us what's next for you, what you have coming up? I hope that we can look forward to some future books from you, if you wouldn't mind sharing anything that you can.
Right. I am doing the last bit of editing on a book that will be out next year, not until October of next year. It's called A Long Time Coming. It's a biography of race in America, and it goes from George Washington to the election of Barack Obama. And it's a story told in verse featuring 6 African Americans and their white and black allies who made America the first multi-racial democracy in the world. It's told from starting with Ona Judge, but this time told for young adults as opposed to younger readers. And then it moves to Frederick Douglass, then Harriet Tubman, Ida B. Wells, Martin Luther King, and ends with the election in 2008 of Barack Obama. And it's called A Long Time Coming, or a lyrical biography of race in America.
And is the tone optimistic?
The tone is real.
The tone is real. Well, yeah. It's
and it's no, it is optimistic. I don't want to be.
No. I just wondered, it's such a moment. I remember what it was like when President Obama was elected, and it's just strange. It's strange to look back at that time as long ago right now.
Yes, but people have been pushing for progress from the very beginning, from 1619 on. So I want to tell their story. I'm trying to find something, but I won't be able to find it. If I could find it, I would read it, but that's okay. You know how it is with computers, or with my sloppiness anyway.
I think we have time for one final question, and I think Daniel can present that and maybe take us away.
Sure. It's less a question as more as, obviously this is a book targeted to children, so I want to hear from Ray in terms of diversity, inclusion, to children themselves as they read a book like this. What advice for kids that want to tell their stories, or they want to capture their own stories, And, this can run the gamut from different ages, but, just words on how you would advise doing that for anyone that's inspired by your book or inspired to do their own story.
Right. Well, regardless of gender or ethnicity, everyone has a story to tell. Each of us are unique individuals. And what you want to do, whether you choose to tell a story about a dog or a human or a tree, is that you want to present the main character, the main object, in a way that readers can identify with. And you want to give that your protagonist, again, it could be a tree, a dog, a cat, or a person. You want to give the protagonist a goal that the reader will identify with and root for the protagonist to accomplish. And then you want to take the protagonist through a series of crises, hurdles that she must clear in order to reach your goal. That, for me, in all my years of trying to be a writer, that's the basic story of human life. So here, if I may, I found the one, well, I maybe can't find it, but anyway, maybe I should stop, but go on. Any other questions?
Well, I think that was beautifully put. And for my part, I want to thank you for participating this morning, for sharing this story with us, for sharing your words and context of the book and the story of Ona with us. And again, much appreciated. It was a beautiful story, and beautiful to have this chat with you this morning.
Well, thank you very much.
And I want to echo thanks from us here at Silver Unicorn Bookstore in Acton, Massachusetts. We are so grateful when authors give us their time and their talent by sharing their wisdom and their voice in these events. You can find out about other author events at our website, silverunicornbooks.com. And we want to thank Direct Federal Credit Union once again for sponsoring this series and for bringing these important voices to the forefront and sharing them with our community. We're very grateful for your support, and Ray, for your talent. And we look forward to a long time coming. Can't wait to see that in print.
Well, thank you very much, Megan and Daniel. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you.